When the super empath finally walks away, it's too late for the avoidant. There's a moment, quiet but final, when the person who loved you hardest stops fighting for you. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally realized they were the only one trying. You see, a super empath doesn't walk away quickly. They stay. They try. They overextend themselves in ways most people wouldn't even notice. They make excuses for someone's emotional distance. They just need space. They're scared of getting hurt. Maybe if I love them better, they'll feel safe. But here's the truth. You can't love someone into emotional availability. An avoidant person isn't bad or broken. They're just afraid. Afraid of being seen too deeply. Afraid that intimacy will strip away their control. So when the empath reaches out, the avoidant pulls back. The empath gives more, hoping it'll bridge the gap. And the avoidant feels smothered, so they run further. But then something shifts. The empath stops chasing, stops explaining, stops waiting for emotional crumbs. And that silence, that's the loudest sound the avoidant will ever hear. Because for the first time, they realize the person who loved them without conditions is gone. And no one will love them quite like that again. It's not revenge. It's not bitterness. It's peace. Because when the super empath finally walks away, it's not with anger. It's with understanding. They've learned that love should never cost you your self-worth. And by the time the avoidant reaches back, it's already too late. Walking away is often misunderstood. People look at the one who leaves and think they gave up too soon, that they couldn't handle the challenge, or that they didn't love deeply enough. But when a super empath walks away, it's rarely because they stopped caring. It's because they finally recognized that their staying was no longer love, it had become survival. For an empath, loving deeply is second nature. They see potential in others, they sense wounds, and they believe that with enough compassion, patience, and presence, love can heal almost anything. So they stay, they endure confusion, distance, and emotional inconsistency because they think their love can reach places words cannot. But what happens when that love becomes a loop? When every attempt to connect is met with silence, or worse, withdrawal? The empath begins to shrink little by little. Their laughter fades, their voice softens, and their boundaries blur. They start walking on eggshells, not because they're weak, but because they're trying to preserve the relationship by minimizing conflict. They take responsibility for the emotional gap that isn't theirs to fill, and the more they give, the less they receive. This is where strength comes in. Strength isn't in holding on to someone who can't meet you emotionally. Strength is in recognizing that love is supposed to be a bridge, not a one-sided climb. It takes courage to admit that someone you care for isn't ready to meet you where you are. It takes even more courage to leave, not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. Walking away means breaking a pattern you once believed was noble. It means facing the loneliness you tried to avoid, the emptiness you filled by fixing others, and the guilt of putting yourself first for the first time. For the empath, this choice feels unnatural. They've built their identity around caring, understanding, and forgiving. Leaving feels like betrayal. But over time, they learn that staying in a relationship where their emotional needs are ignored is also a form of betrayal. One against themselves. The realization comes quietly, usually after one too many nights spent justifying why love has to hurt this much. The heart still loves, but it also understands that love without reciprocity isn't connection, it's depletion. The true act of strength is choosing peace over potential. It's saying, I see your pain, but I can't keep losing myself trying to heal it. It's understanding that not everyone deserves the deepest parts of your heart, especially if they haven't earned your trust or effort. Strength is walking away without slamming the door, without resentment, but with clarity. It's the kind of power that doesn't shout, it simply exits. When the super empath walks away, they're not closing off to love. They're making space for a version of it that doesn't drain them. They're reclaiming the energy they once poured into someone who couldn't receive it. It's not weakness, it's wisdom learned the hard way, the kind that whispers, you can love someone and still choose yourself. Avoidant behavior often looks cold, distant, or even selfish from the outside, but underneath it lies a deep and persistent fear. The avoidant person doesn't push people away because they don't care, they push them away because they care more than they know how to handle. Intimacy, for them, feels like exposure. It threatens their sense of control, the fragile balance they've built to protect themselves from past pain. So when someone gets too close, when emotions start to deepen, their instinct isn't to lean in. It's to retreat. This pattern often begins long before the relationship itself. Many avoidant people grew up in environments where vulnerability wasn't safe. Maybe love was conditional, only given when they behaved perfectly or met expectations. Maybe expressing emotion was met with rejection, criticism, or silence. Over time, they learned that closeness equals danger, that needing someone leads to disappointment, and that the safest way to survive love is to stay just far enough away. By adulthood, this becomes second nature. They crave connection but fear dependence. They long for love but dread what it might take from them. When an avoidant meets a super empath, the dynamic can feel magnetic. The empath senses the avoidant's hidden pain and wants to comfort it, to show them that love doesn't have to hurt. The avoidant, on the other hand, feels seen in a way they rarely have before. For a moment, it's intoxicating, but soon that closeness becomes overwhelming. The avoidant starts to pull back, small things at first, fewer texts, shorter conversations, less eye contact. The empath, sensing the distance, gives more, trying to prove that love is safe. The avoidant feels suffocated, retreats further, and the empath chases harder. It becomes a painful dance of fear and reassurance, of pursuit and withdrawal. The tragedy is that neither person is trying to hurt the other. The empath's intention is to heal, the avoidance is to protect. But love can't thrive in fear. The avoidant's self-protection ends up creating the very loss they're afraid of. By keeping their guard up, they lose the intimacy they secretly crave. By running from vulnerability, they end up alone, confirming their belief that closeness always leads to pain. Avoidant behavior isn't cruelty, it's a defense built from survival. Yet understanding this doesn't make it any less damaging. Empaths often internalize the avoidance distance as their own inadequacy. They think, if I were calmer, more patient, more loving, maybe they'd stay. But no amount of love can reach someone who's still at war with their own heart. Healing avoidant patterns requires self-awareness and willingness from the avoidant person. They have to see that their fear of being hurt is causing them to inflict pain. They have to learn that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the very thing that builds safety in real connection. Until that happens, avoidant love will always be a paradox, longing for closeness while running from it, needing to be loved while fearing what love demands. The empath can offer understanding, but not rescue, because the only person who can make the avoidant feel safe in love is the avoidant themselves. Love, at its core, is meant to be a meeting point, two people reaching toward each other with mutual effort, respect, and vulnerability. But when one person is doing all the reaching, all the healing, and all the giving, love stops being a partnership and starts becoming a project. The super empath often believes that if they just love deeply enough, if they remain patient through every silence, every shutdown, every emotional wall, eventually the other person will feel safe enough to open up. It's a beautiful belief, but also a dangerous one, because love cannot heal someone who refuses to meet you halfway. True love is not about fixing, it's about relating. You can't build intimacy with someone who won't step into the same emotional space as you. You can't connect deeply with someone who's still running from themselves. The empath often confuses compassion with responsibility. They think their understanding of the avoidance pain makes them accountable for it. But it doesn't. You can see someone's wounds without carrying them. You can care deeply without trying to become their emotional therapist. When love turns into constant caretaking, it stops being love and starts being endurance. The empath may find themselves constantly soothing, constantly explaining, constantly proving their loyalty to someone who questions it anyway. They absorb the other person's fears and insecurities, often sacrificing their own emotional needs in the process. This creates an invisible imbalance, one person giving, the other withholding, one person leaning in, the other stepping back. Over time, the empath starts to feel unseen, unappreciated, and emotionally exhausted. They start questioning their own worth, wondering what more they could possibly do to be loved in return. That's the heartbreaking irony. Those who love the hardest often end up feeling the most unloved. For love to heal, both people have to participate in the process. The avoidant has to confront their fears of intimacy, and the empath has to confront their compulsion to rescue. Both need to understand that growth in love doesn't happen through imbalance. It happens through mutual vulnerability. When one person gives endlessly and the other takes without effort, connection becomes performance. The empath becomes the giver of emotional stability while silently breaking down, and the avoidant becomes dependent on receiving comfort without offering real closeness. Healing cannot be handed to someone. You can inspire it, you can model it, you can even love someone through their storms, but you cannot do the emotional work for them. Love only thrives when both people are willing to face their fears and take responsibility for their own healing. When only one person does the work, love turns into a slow erosion of self. The empath learns, sometimes painfully, that saving someone isn't the same as loving them, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop trying to fix what the other person refuses to face. Because love should lift you, not drain you. And if you're the only one carrying it, it's no longer love, it's loss disguised as devotion. There comes a moment in every one-sided relationship when words no longer hold meaning. The empath has explained, reasoned, pleaded, and expressed every ounce of truth they can find within themselves, only to be met with the same emotional wall. So they stop. The silence that follows isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's the quiet power that comes when a person who has given everything finally chooses to stop fighting for what was never being reciprocated. Silence becomes the language of self-respect, a statement that says more than any argument ever could. When an empath withdraws, it often confuses the avoidant partner. They've grown accustomed to the empath's constant presence, the reassurance, the softness, the emotional labor that kept the relationship alive. The empath's silence is unsettling because it removes the comfort of being chased. For the first time, the avoidant is left alone with the echo of their own choices. They realize that the person they thought would never leave has stopped trying, and that realization carries a weight far heavier than words. Silence, in this way, exposes the truth that conversation never could. The empath isn't angry anymore. They're done. This kind of silence isn't about punishment or manipulation. It's not meant to provoke guilt. It's a boundary drawn in the simplest, most peaceful form. The empath no longer needs to prove their worth or justify their feelings. They no longer seek validation from someone incapable of giving it. The absence of their voice isn't a lack of love, it's a declaration of finality. Silence becomes an act of healing, a way of reclaiming energy that was once spent explaining the same pain over and over again. There is a unique strength in quiet detachment. It's not about indifference, it's about acceptance. When words fail to create change, silence becomes the only truth left to offer. For the avoidant, that silence can be haunting. They begin to replay moments, messages, and conversations, searching for signs of when the shift happened. The silence forces reflection, something they've often avoided through distraction or emotional distance. It's in that space, when the empath is gone and the noise fades, that the avoidant finally confronts what they've lost. The irony is that silence does what pleading never could. It brings awareness. It shows, without hostility, the weight of neglect. The empath's absence becomes a mirror reflecting the avoidant's emotional limitations. And while words could be dismissed, silence cannot be ignored. It lingers, it echoes, it teaches. The empath's withdrawal, once seen as weakness, becomes the most powerful act of strength. In that stillness, both people face truth. The empath realizes that peace isn't found in being understood, it's found in no longer needing to explain. The avoidant, meanwhile, realizes too late that silence isn't emptiness, it's consequence. The connection they took for granted has faded, not with a fight, but with quiet dignity. And sometimes that quiet is the most heartbreaking sound of all. Peace after a painful relationship doesn't arrive with a grand moment of closure. It doesn't come with an apology, a final conversation, or the other person suddenly realizing everything they did wrong. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed, on an ordinary day when the empath stops waiting. The waiting has always been the hardest part, waiting for change, for understanding, for the emotional validation that never came. But peace begins the moment the empath accepts that the closure they've been searching for isn't something the avoidant can give. It's something they must create for themselves. Closure is often mistaken for clarity from the other person. People believe they need answers before they can move on. They want to know why it ended, why they weren't enough, or why someone couldn't love them the way they deserved. But the truth is, sometimes you never get those answers. The avoidant may not even fully understand their own behavior. They retreat not because the empath failed them, but because facing intimacy means facing themselves. And that's a battle many aren't ready for. Accepting this truth frees the empath from the endless cycle of what ifs. It's not that they didn't deserve love, it's that the other person wasn't ready to offer it. Peace is not a lightning strike, it's a gradual softening. At first, it feels like emptiness, the space left behind when someone stops trying. The empath might mistake that stillness for loneliness, but with time, they start to see it for what it truly is: freedom. The noise of overthinking begins to fade. The heart, once heavy with confusion, grows lighter. They begin to wake up and realize that their happiness no longer depends on whether or not someone else changes. That's the beginning of emotional independence, the reclaiming of power that was unknowingly given away. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently. The empath begins to see the relationship not as a failure, but as a lesson. They learn that love without mutual effort is unsustainable, that empathy without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. They stop romanticizing potential and start respecting consistency. This shift is where peace roots itself, not in the erasure of what happened, but in the understanding that it served a purpose. Every unanswered question, every disappointment, every moment of silence taught them something about who they are and what they deserve. And slowly, life starts to feel lighter. They begin to find joy in their own company, in the quiet moments that used to feel unbearable. They no longer need to prove their worth to anyone. The closure that never came from the avoidant arrives instead from within as a deep knowing, I gave what I could, and that was enough. That's peace, not the absence of pain, but the acceptance of truth. It's when the empath no longer looks back with longing or anger, but with gratitude for their own strength. Peace doesn't need permission. It arrives when you stop waiting for someone else to set you free. And so, when the super empath finally walks away, it isn't an act of defeat. It's an awakening. It's the moment they realize that love was never meant to be proven through pain or earned through endurance. It was meant to be shared, nurtured, and met with the same depth it's given. The empath doesn't leave because they've run out of love. They leave because they've finally remembered to love themselves too. There's a quiet strength in that choice. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't need to be. It's the kind of strength that comes from deep self-awareness, from recognizing that staying in a one-sided connection doesn't make you loyal, it makes you lost. When the empath steps away, they carry no resentment, only understanding. They don't seek revenge or validation, they seek peace. And in that peace, they rediscover their voice, their joy, and their balance. To the avoidant, that silence may come as a shock. They'll look around for the familiar warmth that once held space for their fears and find only absence. But that absence speaks volumes. It says, you were loved deeply, and now that love has moved on, not out of anger, but out of necessity. And in that moment, they may finally grasp what they couldn't before, that the rarest kind of love is the one that asks for nothing but honesty, and the greatest loss is realizing its value too late. To anyone listening, if you've ever been the one who stayed too long, who gave too much, who mistook patience for purpose, know this: your empathy is not your weakness. It's your superpower. But even superpowers need rest. Your love is precious, but it should never come at the expense of your peace. You deserve a connection that feels like home, not like a battlefield. So, if today finds you standing at the edge of letting go, take heart. You are not giving up. You are growing up. You are choosing to honor your heart, your worth, and your future. And someday you'll look back and realize that walking away wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of your freedom. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling, for reflecting, and for choosing growth over pain. May you always have the courage to love deeply, the wisdom to know when it's time to step away, and the peace that comes from never abandoning yourself again. Thank you, and take care of your heart.